Territorial concessions between Ukraine and Russia are a source of ire, confusion, and a subject of international discussion ahead of the August 15th meeting set to take place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So much so that Europe and Ukraine, in fear of potential fallout, are having an emergency virtual meeting this coming Wednesday with U.S. President and Vice President. Ivana Stradner, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, joins me here on World News Tonight to consider possible scenarios. Ivana, thank you so much for joining me again on World News Tonight.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, the meeting of Europe and Ukraine's leaders was confirmed with U.S. officials that we already know. How much of an influence do you think that this meeting is going to have on the shape of the negotiations taking place on August 15th?
I think words are cheap, and Putin has been candid about his desire to completely subjugate Ukraine. And we already had multiple talks with Russia so far. And what happened so far? Nothing. I'm not very hopeful about August 15 meeting. I actually think it's going to only benefit the Kremlin because Putin wants to show that Russia is still a great power, and it's the only country that can actually negotiate with Russia, that Ukraine should be excluded. So we're doing Putin a favor much more than he's doing us a favor. My also concern is that such negotiations might be understood with mixed signals in the West, meaning that Putin might actually just use such meetings to pose and to buy more time, and then to continue with his ambition. I also think that not inviting Ukraine is not a good thing, because there cannot be peace in that part of the world without Ukraine saying. And my last point is President Trump believes that territory swap and by giving certain concessions to Russia can actually alter Putin's behavior. And President Zelensky said no to such concessions, which is exactly what Moscow wanted to do, because Putin is not negotiating in good faith. This is his game. He asked for something unacceptable to Ukraine, so that Ukraine rejects that offer. And then that Putin can say, you see, I'm ready to negotiate, but it's Zelensky who does not want to negotiate.
Mm-hmm. In relation to what you just said now, we've heard from Sam Greeny, a professor of Russian politics at King's College London, and he said, I quote, "The fact that Putin is going to the U.S. not as a prisoner, and that he's gone from a subject of frustration to some welcomed, and that the meeting is happening without Ukrainians and Europeans, all of that is a diplomatic win." Are we observing a resurgence of Russia on the international stage? And do you actually agree with Professor Greeny?
I think Russia, we have to understand that this war in Ukraine, it's not only about Ukraine. Russia has much bigger ambitions than, unfortunately, many people in the West do not understand. My friends and colleagues in Poland perfectly understand that Putin also wants to challenge NATO and also to create something what Putin likes to call a multipolar world. And how do you create that so-called multipolar world? In a perception. Precisely through places such as Friday meetings, so Putin can use that and to peddle that propaganda in the global South, claiming, how Russia is still a great power. So it is a diplomatic win. And I also have to give a credit where credit is due, because I think President Trump moving a nuclear submarine, it's a step in the right direction, because my concern has been for years that every time we wanted to help Ukraine, Russia would ramp up with nuclear threats. And now that thing is removed. The second thing that I believe that President Trump has done well so far, it is to target all those countries with secondary sanctions that are fueling Russian war machine. Putin not only has to be defeated on the battlefield, but also economically. And the third thing is just the very first fact that Trump has continued to send Ukraine weapons. It's also a step in the right direction, but we also need to do more because Ukraine needs long range missiles. Ukraine needs other weapons. So it's a multifaceted war that we need to tackle. And my last point to that is Washington was also very blunt and about the fact that we're aware here that Putin is not going to stop at Ukraine. Putin's ambitions might actually be in the Baltic states to make sure that NATO's Article 5 is just a paper tiger. This September, we will have elections in Moldova, and make no mistake, Putin is willing and able to challenge the West also there. Putin is already at war with us using hybrid war by sabotage activities. So it's a very complex situation, and we should absolutely not try to simplify this very complex war. But my last point is we cannot win this war unless we think like the Kremlin. We do not need to act, but we have to understand how Putin thinks.
And do you think that the West
Putin,
is starting? Do you think that the West is actually starting to learn how to think like Kremlin?
I think even President Trump, who believed for many, many months that he can negotiate with Putin using a win-win strategy, is finally seeing through his eyes. I also think that Berlin and Paris are seeing through Putin's eyes, and they understand that Putin is preparing for another battlefield against Europe. The problem is that we are running out of time, and Putin has time on his horizon. It's been war for the past 3 years, like a full-scale invasion. And we haven't even ramped up our defense industry. We're working on it, but it's slow. We need to move faster.
We've heard from Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who said that he holds lots of fears and lots of hope about the meeting, noting that President Trump's tactic of unpredictability at times when it comes to various moves and actions is something that he's focusing on. What is your opinion? Could those unpredictable things that Mr. Trump could come up with could actually change the way the negotiations are going to be conducted? Are we going to see some surprises from Mr. Trump ahead of August 15th that Vladimir Putin might not be aware of?
I absolutely agree that one of the things that President Trump the tactics that he has been using is exactly unpredictability. Saying one thing today, something else tomorrow, creating that that gray space where you don't know about his next move. And that's something that Putin doesn't like. And I think Putin is also nervous to the extent, not about this meeting, but nervous about sanctions, nervous about weapons delivery, nervous about our resolve. But one thing that Putin has been also trying to do is to target the center of gravity in the West, which is our alliances. And I'm very, very pleased to see that this week countries in Europe and the United States will work together to tackle this issue. As I mentioned, I'm not really very hopeful about this meeting that they will alter the behavior of Moscow. We should also not fall for Putin's tricks to just freeze the battlefield and then to use that time to replenish his military, to strengthen his economy, and to continue his quest. And finally, we have to understand that this, what Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea want to create, so-called a multipolar world, it is something we should be paying attention and sometimes to zoom out and to understand the big picture of this war. President Trump promised to finish this war in 24 hours. It didn't work. I'm also not sure that, as I mentioned, that this war will end this Friday.
You know, just as Vladimir Putin promised, sorry to interrupt you, but just as Vladimir Putin promised that he's going to take Ukraine within 3 days. And here we are. They're still fighting.
Exactly. Absolutely. And he was not able to do that. Yes.
I would like to take a moment because we've heard during the Sunday morning features at Fox News from Vice President Vance, who said that it's not going to make the deal, the negotiations are not going to make anybody super happy. A few months ago, the U.S. signed quite a lucrative minerals deal with Ukraine, and yet the majority, just to give our viewers a brief overview, the majority of those rare earth minerals and some other important minerals in Ukraine are actually in the Donetsk and Zaporizhia Oblast that are currently in Russian hands. How do you think this issue will be addressed during the negotiations, considering that Donald Trump is actually a businessman first, and he will most likely want to see this deal through?
In the US, we like to say that there is no such a thing as a free lunch, which means that Washington likes to negotiate security issues just in the same way that they would negotiate real estate or any business effort. The problem is that with Russia, you cannot negotiate like that. And you're absolutely right. The mineral deal gave a quick win, to President Trump, but in the long run, I think it's not really going to work precisely because Russia is holding that territory. And not only that, this whole thing about territory swap is not going to work either because Ukraine has been bravely defending its own territory, and there is very little chance / no chance that President Zelensky will give up. So I think whoever believes that peace through trade will bring peace to Ukraine is sorely mistaken. That's not going to happen. That is just another thing that Putin, as a former KGB guy, understands his adversaries, and he understands how Washington thinks, and he understands that here people love to talk about business. They love to talk about cooperation. The problem is Washington likes to think in terms of the win-win strategy. Russia loves to think as a win-lose strategy, so as a zero-sum game. And that's precisely why we should understand how Putin thinks.
And so the fight continues, and we can only hope that soon we will be turning the corner when it comes to that war taking place. Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining.
Always pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure's all mine. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. for another World News Tonight.